Right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this. Okay. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of East Riding of Yorkshire Council's Cabinet. Welcome to everybody in the chamber here and also anybody watching us on YouTube, either now or in the future. So if we move to our agenda, first item is declarations of pecuniary and non-pecuniary and prejudicial interests. Does anyone have any? No, thank you very much. And can we approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting of the Cabinet held on the 7th of June?
Move it.
Okay, that's moved and seconded. All in favour, thank you. And now can we receive the minutes of Overview and Scrutiny Committee and subcommittees? That's the Healthcare and Wellbeing of the 26th of April and 24th of May, Safer and Stronger Communities of the 19th of May, Environment and Regeneration of 25th of May, and Overview, Management and Scrutiny of the 9th of June. Can we move receipt of those?
Move it.
Thank you. So now we move on to item 4, Houses in Multiple Occupation Licensing Policy Review. Mr. Bellotti.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This report follows the Council's first policy on houses in multiple occupation from 2017. That is now 5 years on from that period, and we're now required to update that policy and review it. And of course, things have moved on in the last 5 years in relation to the legislation for houses in multiple occupation, which is set out in the report and also the policy document in Appendix B. Appendix A, for your information, is the current houses in multiple occupation policy. So the Housing Act of 2004 defines a HMO as a house lived in by 3 or more people who are not from the same family and they share a bathroom or a kitchen and those sorts of characteristics. Under the new mandatory licensing scheme, this will affect those people, those homes where there are 5 or more people. This then becomes a mandatory licensed premise. And unlike the period of time in 2017, now the number of stories in a home is not relevant. So in the past, it used to be 3 stories or higher for a home. Now the height of the building is not taken into account. Those are the main differences between Appendix A and B, the current policy and the new proposed policy in front of you. The HMO licenses enables us as a council to put conditions on license holders to make sure that they appropriately manage their homes for tenants and to ensure that there is no antisocial behaviour and that there are other safety measures in place such as gas safety certificates and also for electrical appliances, alarms for carbon monoxide and fire. It is a statutory duty that the council has a mandatory licensing scheme, and the council's licensing committee considered the revised policy in front of you today on the 6th of June, confirmed that it was appropriate and suitable for us to move forward with and fit for purpose. However, they did ask that we add contact details for the council to the license so that when it's displayed in the home, in the premises, that the tenants can easily see who to contact in case of having a need. So I'll take you therefore to the recommendations, asking that you approve the revised policy in Appendix B and to enable further public consultation and stakeholder consultation to be carried out.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bellotti. Councillor Holmes.
Chair, I move that we follow the recommendation, and the 2 reasons that I would highlight is that this increases clarity in terms of what's required, but it also increases safety. And I say that particularly mindful of the fact that police checks will now be required to be no older than 6 weeks, which is an obvious increase in safety for our residents.
Thank you. Councillor Elvidge, do you want to comment?
I would also like to welcome the review and the amendments therein. The importance of protecting our vulnerable residents cannot be underestimated, so I welcome it. Thank you.
Thank you. So if members are happy with the recommendations, and bearing in mind this is now going out to consultation. Everybody happy with that? Yeah. Thank you very much. So we now move to item 5, review of tenants' participation housing services. Again, Mr. Bellotti.
Thank you. I'm delighted on behalf of the team to bring you the updated tenants' participation strategy and approach going forward. It's a very positive report and it'll put us as a council in an even better situation in developing our strong relationships with tenants in our council homes. And the report that you've got in front of you sets out the proposed redesign of the current tenant participation structure within housing services into what we call a housing influence structure, in line with the new white paper for social housing and involving tenants in decisions that we take on their behalf. It also includes the creation of a housing influence structure for tenants to be involved in, and there is a proposed action plan contained in the appendices attached to the report. We've gone into this very carefully and also ensured that there's been third-party and independent advice given to the council on how to develop improved tenants' participation in the housing services we provide. We've consulted the Tenants Participatory Advisory Service, a well-renowned and highly regarded consultancy service nationally. And also we've taken into account the new government white paper, Charter for Social Housing Residents, which was also considered. We carried out a survey with our residents as to whether this new remit and new format, new structures has their support. And you'll see that in section 1.8 of the report, of the 926 responses, over 600 people agreed this was the right approach to take. 85 at most were against. You answered that question. So the attachment and in the appendices in front of you has a lot more detail, Chair, about our future approach going forward. And it also includes a housing scrutiny panel to enable tenants to challenge and provide an independent view of the quality of the services that we provide. This will ensure that the council has a fit for purpose engagement and involvement structure going forward. And we would very much hope that this would allow us to do even better involving our residents in the future years. And that takes us to the recommendation, Chair, that's in front of Cabinet this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bellotti. Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Chair. It's important that our residents and our tenants in particular know that they have a voice, but also that their voice is very valued. And that's exactly what this does. And so for that reason, I move that we follow the recommendations in the report.
Thank you very much. Everybody happy with the recommendations? Thank you. We'll move on to item 6, the affordable rent policy. Mr. Menzies, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This paper relates to the affordable rent policy that we originally adopted in 2019. Since then, government have issued what they call rent setting guidance, which is advising us to amend our original scheme. And the purpose of this report is to deal with that matter. If I can just take you to page 51, paragraph 1.2, that sets out 2 elements in the bullet points as to what the original scheme was. And it was to set affordable rents at 80% of market rents for the locality in which the property is situated. And then for 1 and 2 bedroom dwellings, a rent cap based on 22.5% of average weekly pay and 25% for homes with 3 or more bedrooms. The government guidance is now suggesting that we work on the basis of the 80% of market rents for the locality and not have the rent cap, which we decided to put in 2019. I've set out how the average full-time gross weekly pay is calculated in paragraph 1.3. And it is calculated on a county-wide basis. So it's the administrative area of the East Riding of Yorkshire. And I'll come back to that in a moment. In 1.7, we've just covered the point that if you were to approve this change, the likely effect is on a maximum of 7 households. And that would be when their tenancy agreements came to a conclusion. If I can just come back to the average full-time gross weekly pay, as members are well aware, the economy across the county functions at different rates, wage rates are different, property values are different. So we've attached as an appendix to the revised policy on page 60 some exceptions. And what we're suggesting here is if you use the index of multiple deprivation, the 6 wards that are referenced in the box are all in the lowest 10% most deprived wards in England. And we are therefore recommending, if you are minded to approve the 2022 affordable rents policy, that you exempt those 6 wards. So if I can just take you back to the recommendations, 3 recommendations, that you agree that the self-imposed rent cap is no longer applied, that the new affordable rent policy 2022, which is based around the 80%, is approved and recommended to go to full council, and that you give me delegated approval in consultation with portfolio holder for any minor drafting amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Menzies. Councillor Holmes again, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Mr Menzies for that very comprehensive report. And given it was comprehensive, there's not much I would like to add, but I would like to highlight that it's important that this applies to a small number of properties. It also would not result in any change during the current tenancy, so it's not going to result in an overnight increase for those tenants. It would relate to when that tenancy was renewed with a new tenant. This would apply to other housing providers. We are a housing provider, but we have a large stock and our social rent is still very competitive and very low. And for that reason, I would recommend that we follow the recommendations as outlined by Mr Menzies.
Thank you, Councillor Holmes. And just for clarity, I think that's looking at option 3 of the options that were actually presented to us. So if everybody's happy, I'll just go through the recommendation again. That approve that the council's self-imposed rent cap be no longer applied to the setting of affordable rents for relevant properties. Secondly, approves the new affordable rent policies 2022 as deposited in group offices and placed at public deposit points for onward recommendation to full council. And thirdly, gives delegated authorities to the Director of Planning and Economic Regeneration in consultation with the relevant portfolio holder to make any further minor alterations to the affordable rent policy. Also taking on board the comments made about the various wards that were highlighted in the update given by Mr Menzies. Okay, so are we happy with those recommendations? Okay, thank you very much. Now, item 7, highway commuted sums policy. Again, Mr Menzies.
This paper, Chairman, relates to establishing a highway commuted sums policy. Members, I'm sure, will be aware that under section 38 and section 278 of the Highways Act, highways authorities are able to enter into agreements with developers in respect of the provision of highway and associated infrastructure. The Highways Maintenance CFO Insights Review recommended that the council establish a commuted sums policy, and the purpose of this paper is hopefully to put that in place. The methodology that's been used comes from the County Surveyors Society and ADEPT, and so is a good practice model for local authorities across the country. If I can take you to the appendix on page 67, this is the draft Highways Commuted Sums Policy, and attached at Appendix A are the proposed commuted sums for maintenance liabilities. And Appendix B is an example calculation of a lighting installation as to the methodology that's used. If I can then take you back to the recommendations. The first recommendation is asking you to approve the Highways Commuted Sums Policy, which is at Appendix A. And I'm also asking as a second recommendation that authority is delegated to myself in consultation with the portfolio holder to make any future minor amendments to the policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Menzies. Councillor Holmes.
Thank you. This is a really forward-looking policy that it ensures that there is proper thought put into what kind of maintenance might be required from development going forward, and so I welcome it. and move that we follow the recommendations as outlined.
Thank you. Are we happy with those recommendations? Thank you. Excellent. That's approved. Item 8, the decant policy 2022 to 25. Mr. Menzies.
This report, Chairman, is looking to establish a decant policy for 2022-25. And the council doesn't currently have a policy that covers the moving of tenants within housing stock. And this is an issue where a tenant is required to move from their current permanent home to another one, either temporarily for works or indeed possibly permanently. What we've looked to do is to establish a structured policy as to how we would approach that particular situation should it arise, and that's attached at Appendix A in draft form. If I can take you to page 73 and 74, we've set out in section 2 the approach we've taken, and we've suggested some allowances that can be applied at 2.4 and 2.5 to support tenants where they are required by the landlord to relocate for whatever reason. I also can report that the draft document was discussed at a recent tenant participation group meeting. 1 or 2 minor drafting amendments were suggested, which, if you were to approve the recommendations, I would recommend are taken on board. So if I can take you to page 72, first recommendation is we're asking Cabinet to approve the new decant policy 22-25 as deposited in group offices and at public deposit points for onward recommendation to full council. And secondly, that you give me delegated authority in consultation with the portfolio holder to make any minor amendments, which would include consideration of the tenant participation forum views as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Menzies. Councillor Holmes.
So thank you. There are, of course, occasions where tenants have to decant for good reason, either temporarily or permanently. And so this policy increases clarity for them as to what they can expect in that particular situation. I wonder whether Mr. Menzies is able to help us with an indication of how many or what percentage or to what extent residents will benefit from that. I know that our housing stock is somewhere around approximately, I think, 11,500 properties. Is he able to assist us in whichever way is easiest for him, to what extent any number have to decant in an annual period? Is it a small amount, a large amount?
I can confirm the stock is approximately 11,500. I don't have to hand the individual numbers, but I'll happily provide a background note to the portfolio holder following the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Menzies.
Thank you.
Councillor Medini.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it's good that we've got something, a policy in black and white for tenants, to fall back on if they need to. It's also reassuring to know that the tenant participation has looked at this as well, so that's good to know.
Thank you. So, everybody happy with the recommendations? Thank you. Okay, thank you. We now move on to item 9, revenue and capital budget outturn 2021 to 22. Mr. Nielsen, shall I come to you? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to present the budget outturn position for 2021-22. Starting with the general fund, that is showing an underspend of 15 million against budget, which is previously approved as being transferred to the efficiency fund reserve. The position is summarised in the table at the top of page 77. And the variances are in line with those reported throughout the financial year, along with the narrative that supports those. So I won't go through that in detail, but the overriding 2 main factors for that underspend position has been the ongoing challenges in recruitment and retention of staffing, which has led to underspends on staffing budgets, and also specific and temporary budgets that have been put in place to address the financial impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our income and expenditure, and those budgets have not been required in full due to how the pandemic has developed during the year. The only significant change in terms of variances on the general fund budget is paragraph 2.7 on page 80, where there's a previously unreported variance representing £9 million worth of grants we have received from the government to compensate us for additional business rates relief that has been provided to support businesses through the pandemic. And that money we receive in 21-22, but the impact on our budget happens in 22-23 when any deficit on collection has to be charged under regulations. So essentially we need to carry that funding forward. It therefore has net nil impact on the reported budget position. And that forms recommendation 1 of the report to carry forward that money through reserves so that we can bring it into the 22-23 budget to offset the charge. At paragraph 2.8, 2.9, we've summarised the planned budget savings. So when the budget was set, we included £10.6 million of savings that needed to be delivered in the general fund budget. We've delivered 10.4 million of those, a small shortfall of 0.2 million, which we've described in the paragraph there. But there are plans in place to fully realise that shortfall in future years, and the measures are set out in detail at Appendix 1 for members' information. Paragraph 2.10, that refers to Appendix 2, which sets out the detailed list of additional budget measures that members approved when it originally set the budget for 2021-22 back in February 2021, and shows our progress in delivering those specific initiatives. You can see that the vast majority of that money is committed to spending plans in future years. There is a shortfall of around 1.2 million associated with the Council Tax Hardship Fund and the business rates relief we provided to early years providers. That was utilised during the budget setting process for the current year when Council made decisions in February 22 to support similar measures in the current financial year. So essentially all of that money has been fully committed going forwards. At 2.11, we have put together some recommendations on use of the £15 million general fund underspend, which has been transferred to the Efficiency Fund Reserve. And there's 4 bullet points at the top of page 81, which form recommendation 2 of the report. So we're proposing that 7 million is earmarked to manage inflationary pressures on the 22-23 budget due to the historically high levels of inflation currently being experienced and the likely impact on our staff pay, as well as energy and fuel costs. £2 million to be transferred to the Capital Investment Fund to provide additional funding towards priorities for capital investment. 1.6 million to support the continued delivery of the Adult Social Care Change Programme, and the remaining 4.4 million earmarked to allow funding decisions to be taken during the year, which will enable the Council to provide targeted support to local community in response to the cost of living crisis, as well as other emerging priorities. Paragraph 2.12 refers to recommendation 3 of the report, where we received some Troubled Families grant in the current financial year 22-23 of 0.7 million. And that is just about establishing the supplementary budget in the current financial year to fund the spend associated with that funding. In section 3, I've set out the position on the schools budget, which is again largely as reported previously. We're showing an outturn overspend of 4.8 million, which largely relates to the high needs funding block, 2.5 million overspend there, and a 1.8 million overspend on the early years funding block. At paragraph 3.5, I've also referred to there is a 0.2 million pound overspend on the schools funding block due to a net overspend of 0.7 million pounds by primary schools and a net underspend of 0.5 million pounds by secondary schools. At section 4, there's just a minor overspend of 0.1 million on the housing revenue account. And section 5, on the capital budget, we've successfully delivered 111 million pounds worth of capital investment against a budget of 112.1 million pounds. The underspend largely reflects changes in the timing and classification of capital spend. And importantly, nearly half of the programme delivered in 21-22 has been externally funded to the tune of 49.4 million. In terms of those changes in the profile of spend, those that are above the delegated financial decision threshold of 250,000 have been set out in Appendix 3. And the most significant of those is the accelerated spend on the broadband phase 3 programme of 1.1 million and delayed spend on the Appleton Court extra care housing and St Anne's School scheme of 1.1 million on page 92. And those the approval of those variances and changes to budgets forms recommendation 4 of the report. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Nielsen. I think it's worth saying it's been a sort of very difficult year and very unpredictable the last 12 months. And this is the result of that sort of very difficult year in many ways. And first of all, I must say, an excellent job done by council officers to actually come in with sort of 98% of the savings that were in that year's budget. I mean, I'm not worried about the 2%. That's in terms of daily cash flow. I don't think that really amounts to much. So huge achievement in, achieving those savings. I think also in a position where we have an underspend of 15 million pounds, which sounds wonderful, but in a strange sort of way, probably not what we would really want, because what it means is, we have had workforce issues, staff shortages, so we have a shortfall in the services that we would have wanted to deliver. And I think I have to stress that these are one-off in nature, hopefully, and moving forward, not something that's repeatable every year, certainly not to that magnitude. I'd like to comment on the capital budget as well. To carry on with a over £100 million a year capital budget is pretty good. And I think there won't be many authorities in the country that are doing that. And also that they are, it's local jobs and it's employment for people. So that money is being spent mainly in the local economy as well. We must never lose sight of that. I think the key part of this report, and I'm not going into the finer detail, is really around allocating that £15 million underspend. And this is something that, that there are items in the report, we said at sort of 2.11, and these haven't been sort of pulled out of the air by officers and directors. We have had discussions as cabinet members and portfolio holders around the use of that funding, hence the bullet points that have appeared in the report. So these are not things being presented to us as elected members. These have been in discussion with us and are now appearing in the report. So certainly I would just go through those 4 points again. £7 million to be earmarked to manage the forecast pressures on our general fund reserve, mainly to look ahead to high levels of inflation in terms of pay settlements, etc., and those unknowns around energy, fuel, and increases that we can't yet predict for the rest of the year. So that's the best estimate of what we feel we need to set aside. Certainly £2 million we're talking about transferring to the Capital Investment Fund for various items where we might need to call on those funds, but particularly around some of the SEND work that's in children's services and looking at residential provision in East Riding, which is critical to us, I think, moving forward. Also to the Adult Social Care Change Programme, and I know, so Your Life, Your Way, and moving that forward, it's key that that initiative moves forward, because it's we have to front some investment in schemes there for the longer term delivery of savings across the system. And we can't drop that, I don't think, at this stage, and we need to carry on investing there. Which leaves us to the other 4.4 million. And I can say, I'm sure council officers can give us a range of projects they'd like to use that money on, but I think it's this current economic climate and our cost of living crisis, we felt strongly we need to park that money to one side and then to consider how that can be used to support the most vulnerable. As you know, the cost of living crisis continues throughout the year. We don't know what additional funding we may get from government. And until we know that, it's very hard to specify at this time how that money could best be used. But I think it's only fair that we don't allocate that money for any specific projects at this point in time, but have it there to use during the course of the year when we understand fully the impacts on the more vulnerable members of our population and how they can be best supported. So at this moment in time, that's why we decided we'd like that £4.4 million just to be parked to one side. So apart from that, I don't know if any other members would like to comment at all on the figures. I mean, it's a good story in very, very difficult times, but we're very, very conscious of the pressures, ahead at the moment, which are very uncertain. And still, when we only get annual funding at the moment, and I know Michael Gove has promised at the LGA conference last week to give us 2 years of funding, but I don't think that will make a huge amount of difference in terms of forward planning. But a good report. Well done to all the officers that have struggled and worked really hard during the year across all directorates. And I think it's a fantastic outcome, but we must be very prudent in how that money is now used moving forward. So if no comments from anybody else, are we happy to move the recommendations? Okay. Thank you, members. Item 10, First Homes. And, Mr. Menzies, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This report relates to a new government-led initiative to provide additional affordable housing. And the principle around this is that through the Section 106 agreement, something like 25% of all affordable housing will be taken to the market on the basis of a discount in terms of the value, which is then secured in perpetuity through a title land registry. So whenever the property is sold, the same percentage discount has to be applied forever. The government guidance, and I've set it out on page 95, asks us a number of questions in terms of our views on how this may be delivered. And if I might, I'll come back to those when I've just gone through the rest of the report. I've set out at 1.6 at page 96 in the table how we anticipate this working in terms of the overall provision of affordable housing. So across the whole of the county, we anticipate the 25% first homes. We then have differing levels of social or affordable rents. And that then in the final intermediate, and that's shared equity, that simply reflects where there is a market for it. So we're back to a point I made in a previous report. Bridlington, Goole and South Holderness, a significant index of multiple deprivation issues. And so we think it's unlikely that there will be much demand, if any, for intermediate shared ownership property. How this scheme is to work is that the house builder is to promote the scheme. We have to approve each application as the local authority, and we have to sign off any values that are involved in the transaction. The individual purchaser will still be expected to acquire a mortgage and have relevant deposits to do so. So there are some issues around various caps, which I'll come back to you. So if we can just try and deal with the issues on page 95. The criteria is fairly flexible. It allows us to apply a local connection if we want to, in terms of people that are interested in taking up this opportunity. And I think officers are very positive about doing that. And we've attached Appendix 1, a document which is an extract from the Housing Allocations Policy 2020. And I think our suggestion would be, if members are minded to have a local connection, it's based upon that policy, so we have consistency. We are also able to nominate key workers as being able to take advantage of this scheme. And I think officers' views on that were, initially we would suggest we don't, but we are proposing that there is a review after 12 months on all of the various elements, so that we can make sure that if we need to tweak the policy, we can. The income cap recommended by government is £80,000 per household. We are able to reduce that if we choose to. The logic that government have used is that they feel that £80,000 would be sufficient for a mortgage to be afforded and sufficient for a deposit to be saved. In the East Riding, if you take an average male's salary, its wages and salary, it's about £34,000, and an average female is about £27,000. So I think officers' recommendations are, if you are looking to potentially reduce that cap, we would suggest you didn't reduce it below £65,000. We can also change the discount from 30% to increase it if we choose to. And certainly our valuation and the state's team's advice is is likely to cause significant viability issues on a lot of sites across the East Riding. So we would suggest certainly for the initial period, we retain the 30%. And the price cap, government have suggested the maximum is £250,000. That's with the discount applied. We are able to reduce that should we choose to, but I think again, officers are suggesting that we go with the government guidance, monitor and then review after 12 months to see how that's actually worked in practice. If members have any particular questions, I'll do my best. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Menzies. Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome this initiative, which will now enable buyers to buy their own first home. The challenge is how to set the criteria wide enough that a buyer is found within the window, but not to set it so wide that those who need to benefit from this scheme can't because somebody else has already purchased the house. And so I move that we follow the recommendations as set out in that the local connection is applied with the 30% discount applied because of the concerns of viability that have been expressed by officers. And with the income level of £70,000 justified by the data, which is in full in the report at paragraph 2.4, looking at average incomes within the East Riding. I welcome the officer's recommendations that this be reviewed in 12 months because, as I say, it's clear what the challenge is. We have to see how it works in practice and see if any of these requirements do need to be adjusted, such as the price cap and the addition of key workers. And so a 12-month review would allow us to do that with proper evidence as to who had been able to benefit from the scheme in that last 12 months and whether or not those things needed to be changed to allow us to benefit going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Everson.
Can I just ask just a question on process under 1.3, where if a developer enters into this scheme and they have to advertise for, obviously they've got to advertise their, put them on the market, they have up to 6 months. And then if no interest is shown, are we going to actually be checking on how they're marketed? Is there going to be a process there?
Mr Menzies.
I think the straight answer is we would have to do that through the planning process because the Section 106 agreement would be the legal agreement that sets in place how this actually works. And we would need to ensure that the house builder or developer did positively market it for 6 months, didn't get appropriate interest. If that's the case, they can ask to move it into a market position, but they will have to make a payment through the 106 agreement in lieu of that property in cash to the council, which can be spent elsewhere in providing accommodation. So, Chairman, would it be helpful if I just whip you through the recommendations?
Just check we've covered all of them. Yes, I have my list here, but see if we agree on that.
So the first recommendation is to deal with the criteria. And Councillor Holmes, I think, has set out as portfolio holder her proposal, which I think would comply with the government guidance fully. So that's good. The second one is that you agree that delegated authority, and this is for individual transactions, is given to me to sign them off. And that's simply because our valuation and estates team will have to certify that the numbers are correct and appropriate. And the third issue is that in respect of each transaction, that we charge £150 per transaction. And again, that to be reviewed with all the other elements after 12 months.
I think I also had on my list that we would review the key worker position after 12 months rather than implement it now. And I think we had the £70,000 rather than £80,000. And leave, I think the discount applied at 30% for the time being. I think that sort of completes the set there. I don't know if
Chairman, just for the minutes, could I just check on the price cap that we are just setting using the national criteria limit?
yes, I think that's the agreement there. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Councillor Harold, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to really just highlight the fact that I think it's really important that we keep the local connection in there. You know, many of us have villages and other areas within our wards that do often really struggle to be able to offer the kind of housing that's needed for their residents. So to have that in there, I think is really important. And whilst Mr. Menzies, you know, spoke about some of the areas that he feels it might not be offering, well, having a good uptake, I'm really optimistic that some of these areas are on the up. The regeneration is well on its way, and I'm really hopeful that some of these will be taken up. So again, I think it's a great scheme. It does offer that part ownership and affords some families and some residents to get on the property ladder when they wouldn't be able to do before. So in fully support it, I'm fully supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Holtby.
Yes, thank you. Just referring to 1.3 at the bottom of page 95, where Mr. Menzies mentions flipping the property to become a market unit. I just wonder whether he can give us an idea of how they will calculate what a developer would have to pay to flip the property for it to become a market unit. And earlier on in the piece, it says that these houses will, if they aren't flipped, they will remain at a discount, you know, going forward. So this, if a property is flipped, then it would become a market unit going forward. So it would then come out of the scheme altogether. So it just seems as if that could be a little bit of a get out for the developers if they maybe possibly don't market it as well as they might do.
Mr. Menzies, would you like to comment?
The straight answer is that's why there has to be a Section 106 legal agreement which sets out not only the type of property and the scale of property and the value, but also sets out what happens if a developer or a house builder comes back and says, I've actively marketed this property for 6 months. I haven't found somebody who wants to take advantage of the First Homes Initiative. Can I move it into being a commercial property and make a financial contribution towards affordable housing to the council? That has to be set out as well. So from a viability point of view, this will be fairly tightly controlled, which is one of the reasons why we have to charge a fee for each transaction to cover the cost of managing the process.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Holtby. Yes, thank you. So the recommendations were the criteria, etc., which we've just discussed and outlined. Then to agree that delegated authority is given to the Executive Director of Planning and Economic Regeneration to approve applications, and agrees that the fee per property is charged for first homes delivered through the planning system, which is initially £150 reviewed in 12 months. So are we happy with those recommendations? Thank you. So we now move to item 11, the annual progress towards meeting the equality duty and the corporate equality objectives 2021 to 22. Mr Stevens.
Okay, thank you, Chair. This is an annual report that last came to Cabinet almost a year ago on the 6th of July 2021. And there is something called the Public Sector Equality Duty, which is referred to in the report, and it came into force in April 2011, and it was born out of the 2010 Equality Act. And this duty requires public bodies, including the council, to have due regard to the need to eliminate discrimination, advance equality of opportunity, and foster good relations between different people when carrying out their activities. And the Equality Act makes it illegal to discriminate against anybody on the basis of one of 9 protected characteristics that are referred to in the report, and they are age, gender reassignment, being married or in a civil partnership, being pregnant or on maternity leave, disability, race, religion or belief, sex, and sexual orientation. And these protections apply in various settings, such as at work, in education, as a consumer, and when using public services or when buying or renting property. And that's really why this report covers both our residents, how we deliver services, but also our activities as an employer in terms of our staff. And one of the things that the council is required to do is to publish information to demonstrate our compliance with this duty and to identify what objectives we're working to in this particular area. And that's what has led to this annual report. Now, I think one important point I'd like to make is that I framed this so far in my introductory remarks in terms of compliance with the law, but our council has shown that although of course we want to comply with the law, we want to go further than that, and we think it's the right thing to do for our residents and for our staff. And we show that commitment as a council in our existing equality plan 2020 to 2024, where the very first line of that plan talks about a commitment to treat all residents, service users and staff fairly and ensuring that equality of opportunity to all is imbued in everything that we do. And it's further reinforced in our people strategy, which you as the Cabinet approved on the 21st of September last year, where it talks about promoting and supporting equality, diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And that is a really significant part of that people strategy, because having that inclusive environment within the council as an employer helps people feel that everybody matters and they're able to participate and achieve their full potential. And we aspire in the people strategy to go beyond the minimum legal standards and achieve wider benefits through embedding this approach to equalities in all the workforce matters that we tackle and address. And what the report in front of you today does is set out with numerous examples how these words and commitments have been put into practice within the council and across the East Riding over the past year. And you can see that it covers a multitude of different areas, from how we embed equality analysis into report writing and how we make decisions. It talks about the council's gender pay gap, which has come down over the years and compares well to other comparable organisations. The needs assessment that have been carried out most recently on sensory impairment, the translation and interpretation service that the council offers, and numerous examples of services across the council embedding equalities into their approach to delivery. And there are examples in the report from Surrey Hall and Gardens to Revenues and Benefits to Bridlington Spa, the school music service, and many others beside. And there's an important section in the report at 2.55 that covers what the council is doing internally, as I've already referred to, in terms of its staff. And I think as a council, we're pleased, I think, collectively with what's happened over the last 2 years in that area, particularly since you approved the people strategy. And pages 113 and 114 of today's papers set out the progress that has been made in that area, with a lot more to come as set out in that section in terms of the Workforce Equalities Action Plan. And I'd like to stress the important role that Councillor Birch has made as member champion. It's referred to in the report as member champion for equalities, diversity and inclusion. I think he's been both very supportive to us as officers, but also very constructively challenging. And he's made a genuine difference to advancing this work. And I think you've only got to watch a recording of the Overview Management Committee meeting on the 24th of March, which Councillor Holtby also attended, to see that in action. And I'd say that that actual agenda item at the scrutiny committee, in addition to Councillor Birch's contribution, was a really good example of how the council is developing this area of work. So in conclusion, I'd like to recommend that the Cabinet receives this annual report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Handley.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Stevens. That's an excellent report. I really enjoyed reading it. Tackling inequality, particularly for those with protected characteristics, is critical to all aspects of service delivery across this council. This report sets out some excellent progress made by a range of services, and it is pleasing to note that we are delivering against the equality objectives at this midpoint of this lifespan. This is whilst also recognising that there is still much to do to advance equality of opportunity for our most vulnerable. And I would also like to recommend that we receive this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Handley. Councillor Elbridge.
I too welcome this report, and I think it would be remiss not to comment on item 216 on page 106, where practical examples are there of how we move forward in our inclusivity and equality. When we look at the Bridlington Spa having sign language performances, we have the success of our first Bridlington Pride event that's just taken place. And I think one of the most outstanding things I've heard recently is the beach accessible wheelchairs at Bridlington and Hornsey. So I think we're doing fantastic work. We know we can do more, but this fills me with the utmost confidence that we are doing more and we will do even more in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harold, did you want to speak? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to reiterate, really, I think it was a really great read, sir, to thank Mr. Stevens for the report. And I think it gives us an assurance that we as a council aren't just doing a tick box exercise. We aren't just doing what, we think we should be doing. Actually, we're going over and above and we're doing more, and the things that Councillor Elbridge has just highlighted, again, I want to congratulate officers for ensuring that we do have those facilities. The school music service, what they're doing to try and promote, absolute inclusivity in its fullest term. And again, those protected characteristics are so important, to ensure that nobody is at a disadvantage at all, and we do have that parity. I think as well, if one thing I can just highlight is the way that we have promoted the work that Councillor Birch has been doing, and that being offered that champion role has seen him absolutely excel in that. He has been amazing. And in my previous year, when it was under my portfolio, we held meetings with the Hull Pride event, and how fantastic now that the East Riding are contributing to that. The first Bridlington Pride event at the weekend, absolutely amazing. We've seen some real steps in the right direction, in my opinion. And again, following on from what Mr. Stevens said, just a massive thank you to Councillor Birch, because he has done such an amazing job in undertaking that task of being a true champion. So just really wanted to just add that, and I'm fully supportive of everything within the report. So thank you.
Thank you. Nobody else indicated they wish to speak, but just to echo my comments as well, I think things like having a champion in Councillor Birch's makes us not just compliant, but become aspirational, as Mr. Stevens sort of alluded to, which I think is a good thing. And can I also comment on the fantastic coverage that the Pride events have actually had? I know it's only a small section of equalities at the end of the day, but I think how things have changed over 10 and 20 years. And, we can continue to be aspirational and inclusive for everyone. And that's what we should always aim for, I think, moving forward. So more than happy to receive the report if all other members are as well. Thank you. Thanks very much. So we move on to item 12, Christmas and Remembrance Sunday parking. Mr. Menzies.
The council has for a good number of years supported local retail efforts in our market towns in the run up to Christmas by waiving car parking charges on the 4 December weekends. In 2018, we added the second Sunday in November, which is Remembrance Sunday. and you approved a 3-year period for us to waive the car parking charges in December and the second Sunday in November. That period has now come to a conclusion. And the purpose of this report is to seek your approval to running the same scheme for an additional 3 years. So that's 22, 3 and 4. Happy to answer any questions, Chairman.
Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. Yeah, as Mr Menzies has said, it's a scheme that we've run for many years in the East Riding, and it was 3 years ago that we brought in the fact that to give retail businesses that confidence, we would make it for 3 years so they could actually know without having to wait for us to go through Cabinet and make the announcement. They would know in advance that they certainly would be having that free parking and the support that we like to give them in that important time of year. Added to that is, as Mr Menzies said, is the Remembrance Sunday. We do this obviously to support retail, but it is at a time when it also includes Small Business Saturday. So it's our way of contributing towards that as well. And Beverley Festival of Christmas, which is something that attracts many visitors. The Remembrance Sunday, I think it's perhaps worth mentioning as well. Free car parking is generally, in place on a Sunday in most places anyway. But in Bridlington, that isn't the case. They do have car parking charges on a Sunday. And this was thought of very much with them in mind as well, because they obviously have their Remembrance Sunday service. And then it was becoming a little of an issue, if you like, that they were the only ones that were having to pay for parking across the road in Morton Lane car park. So taking that into consideration, this is being extended. And again, for 3 years, I'm very pleased to see 3 years again, giving our businesses that confidence that they know this is going to be taking place for the next 3 years.
Thank you, Councillor Everson. I think the recommendation, just for clarity, is that Cabinet adopts free parking across the East Riding of Yorkshire's Council's public access chargeable car parking areas over specified times and dates, and they are the 4 December weekends immediately preceding the 2022, 2023 and 2024 Christmas bank holidays, and for Remembrance Sundays in 22, 23 and 24. So we're happy with the recommendation. Thank you. Item 13 now, delivering the Council's key corporate strategies, and it's the Q4 Performance Review 2021-22. Mr Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. This report provides a Q4 performance update for 2021-22, and it utilises the Council's current corporate performance framework. And I emphasise the word current because, as everybody in this room knows, we're currently reviewing how the Council reports on its performance, and the intention is to soon have refreshed arrangements in place for implementation in the autumn. So I hope and think that the next time that you consider these matters at Cabinet, we will have those new arrangements in place. And this new member-led performance framework is being developed as we speak around the Council's 5 priorities that were refreshed as part of the business plan process earlier this year. And this follows feedback from yourselves as Cabinet, from Overview Management and Scrutiny Committee, and is an action in the Local Government Association Peer Challenge action plan. There's already been one workshop with Cabinet, the corporate management team and the senior management team to work together collaboratively on this. And there's another such workshop on the 18th of July, where, as I say, it's hope we can firm up the future approach for implementation in the autumn. And in terms of today's report, the current corporate performance framework monitors the Council's progress towards delivering the objectives stated in the 6 key corporate strategies that we list in section 1.3 of the paper. And there are a total of 109 outcome measures in the framework, and full details of how each of those measures are performing can be found in appendices 1 and 2 of the report. And as you can see, at the end of Q4, data was reported for 91 of the 109 measures. The other 18 are explained by data not being available for 5 of them, and 13 of the measures are currently suspended because they relate to the SEND strategy for which performance monitoring has been suspended for the reasons described the last time this report was brought to Cabinet, and as set out in section 1.8 of today's report. And of those 91 measures for which we do have data, 55 are achieving or exceeding their milestone target, and that's up from 50 when we last looked at this at Q3. 19 were within their agreed tolerance and 17 have not achieved their milestone target. And as it says in the executive summary of the report, of the 6 key strategies, 4 are performing above or within their tolerances, and the 2 exceptions are the strategy and vision for adult social care and support and the economic strategy. And the reasons for this in relation to the adult social care strategy are set out in section 2.9 of the report. I won't rehearse the reasons because they're set out there, but I'm sure they can be picked up if you wish during questions. In terms of the economic strategy, the 2 particular subsections not achieving their respective milestones are business growth and sustainable economy, and section 2.10 of the report explains the reason for this in more detail. Some of those reasons are outside of the Council's control and are explainable by the impact of the coronavirus pandemic and the measures that were taken to tackle it. But we have got good news in relation to the economic strategy in that since the Q3 report, the quality location subsection has moved from red to green. So in conclusion, this is all about ensuring the Council's performance is monitored and managed effectively. It's important to say that this happens in lots of different ways across the Council, not only in this report that comes to the Cabinet, and it's recommended for today that the Cabinet receives this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Councillor Handley.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. I can confirm that Councillor Owen and myself looked at the new framework that's actually being worked up at the moment, and I have to say it looks excellent, really easy to follow, and just a really good job done. It will support portfolio holders and officers alike to encourage even richer discussions around performance, promoting transparency and sharing our successes and the challenges. But collectively managing and addressing them together, developing a performance culture of co-production, and I very much look forward to the new framework. It really does look excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Evison.
Thank you very much. Can I, you've just sort of made me want to question you, Mr. Stevens, when you said that the target for in economic development for vocations, is that the occupations requiring level 4 qualifications you were referring to, or something else?
Sorry, can you just say, could you repeat that?
Well,
Sorry.
let me say, I was going to actually mention anyway, because it's highlighted as not achieving milestones under page 123, the occupations requiring level 4 qualifications. And I was going to go on and say, in a rural authority, I mean, that's always an issue because we're predominantly micro businesses, and they've, that's the way we've been for many years. Obviously, the climate is changing. We now have Siemens, Croda, Pensana, Equinor coming on, a lot of big businesses, a lot of them requiring higher than level 4 qualifications, and very great opportunities for people in the area. So although that is marked now as in red, I see that changing quite quickly in the months to come. Yeah. And I don't know if that's what you were referring to about vocational or not.
Sorry, I actually said quality locations.
Oh, so I beg your pardon. I thought you said vocational. Sorry.
That's why I was slightly, because there is a subsection called quality locations. From memory, when I presented the Q3 report, the reason that was in red at the time, and I think there were 2 reasons cited in the report, that was to do with bus usage and the patronage of trains. And I suspect what's happened, although I haven't actually looked at the detail, I suspect what's happened is that as the restrictions around the pandemic have been released, I suspect that bus usage and the usage of trains has gone back to something that resembled the pre-pandemic levels. And that's why quality locations, or one of the reasons why the quality location subsection has moved from red to green.
Well, I go back to my comment, and then that the occupation requiring level 4 qualifications, I think we will see those milestones being met in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Harold.
Thank you, Chair. My question was just really, for Mrs Stevens around, you've already touched on the social care measure that we haven't reported on due to the pandemic. Also, there's one in there around children reading and writing. So I'm just really looking for an assurance as to when they will be put back on as a measure.
When the new arrangements are developed, obviously the measures reflecting your portfolio area and Mr. Rush's directorate will have to have will be an integral part of the new performance framework. The reason they're suspended at the moment is because they're pending the development of the SEND strategy. But what you're talking about will obviously play an important and core part of the new arrangements for the next time we report.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody happy to receive the report and okay, and we look forward to the new version moving forward, which I'd just sort of echo Councillor Handley's comments, only having a brief look at the style that's going to be coming forward. I think it'll be a lot more user friendly, a lot more member friendly in terms of relating to our priorities and key areas. So look forward to that coming forward for our next report. Thank you very much. And we move on to item 14, forward plan of key decisions. Anything to add, Mr. Stevens, to what's printed?
Yeah, nothing to add, Chair.
Okay, everybody happy to receive that report? Thank you. And I now have to exclude any